Hello to you, Mr. Shapps. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Let's start with the unions, should we? Just finishing there. How are you feeling about the possibility that the military is going to be brought in to fill the gap should ambulance workers go on strike?
Yeah, I saw that story. I don't think that's actually correct, other than to say that the government always looks at contingency plans, but there aren't any immediate plans to do that. And actually, the NHS has got some pretty well-versed planning in place for all manner of disruption. Of course, ideally, I'd love to see those strikes averted. I don't think anyone wants to see strikes in our NHS. It harms everybody, and it's to no one's advantage.
OK. Are nurses worth a 19% pay rise?
Well, we followed, it's worth saying we followed the NHS pay review body when it comes to nurses, which I think is a £1,400 pay rise this year. It comes on top of, I think, 3% last year when inflation was lower and there were a lot of freezes elsewhere. But, you know, I'll leave it to the experts on this. I think the main message to everybody is we don't want to see strikes in our NHS. You know, we will rely on it and, you know, we want to see it functioning normally.
The chap who's now doing your former job, Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, is saying we can't afford a 10% pay rise, an inflation-busting pay rise for anybody. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen how this works before. I mean, you have to go back several decades, but high inflation, if you then feed the high inflation with high settlements, you end up in a spiral where it never ends. And that's what happened in the 1970s. We're very determined not to be in that situation now. It won't benefit anybody. And, you know, we all know the reason for this. We all understand that Putin invaded Ukraine, pushed up energy prices, pushed up inflation. We mustn't chase that inflation. Otherwise, we won't get it out of the system, which in a year's time, we will have seen it fallen to half the current level, according to the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility. We want to see that happen because inflation's really the evil that we all need to defeat for the benefit of the whole of society.
Yeah, although, you know, the unions disagree with you and they are starting to square up to this government. Certainly you weren't particularly engaged with the transport unions when you were Transport Secretary. Jake Berry, the former Tory party chair, yesterday saying that was a big mistake by you, and your successor is now having conversations with Mick Lynch and the like. In hindsight, do you think that you should have engaged with the unions sooner and we wouldn't have been in this position?
Of course, the unions were sort of constantly saying we need to speak, although the actual discussion needs to be between the employer and the unions themselves. And as has rather been demonstrated, in fact, the last two Transport Secretaries, I was actually Transport Secretary 3 ago, have both spoken to the unions. It doesn't appear to have stopped them from announcing a whole new set of strikes. So it rather proves the point that we've all been making, myself and the current Transport Secretary included, which is the only way to resolve these strikes is for the unions and the management, the rail operators, Network Rail, to discuss these things, and rather brings a lie to the idea that if only we sat down and spoke, this would all be over, as the unions have been claiming. That simply is not true, because they are still striking.
Yeah, on the contrary, if you had sat down and talked to them, perhaps we wouldn't be in this position.
Well, why would that be the case? We're still in that position with the last couple
why
of...
Why is the present Transport Secretary saying that he will sit down and talk to them now, and you just didn't want to entertain them, they say?
Because the only resolution to this is between the management and the...
So you shouldn't be chatting to them?
But I mean, it's not that you shouldn't. And actually, I had spoken to Mick Lynch in the past as the boss of the RMT. It's simply that it doesn't seem to resolve it one way or the other. And I can prove that point because the last couple of Transport Secretaries have spoken to them. I had a situation where I allowed the unions and the management, who are the only people who can resolve this, to speak directly. Actually, it transpires, it doesn't matter which way you go around this. The unions seem absolutely intent on causing the maximum disruption to hardworking people in this country. It's time for them to stop grandstanding and get this thing settled. Fortunately, actually, when it comes to rail, there are lots of modernisations that could be carried out, lots of them, which could help to pay for their increase, but they don't want to modernise. They want to keep stuck in the 1970s and before, rather than modernise the railway, and that's a great shame because it's costing all passengers a lot because of that intransigence.
Okay. Talk to me about what's going on in China. You've obviously seen the images overnight. Huge instability there. Biggest protest since Tiananmen Square is what we're saying here on Sky News this morning. What does that instability mean for us as a nation?
Well, look, we're watching very carefully indeed to see what's happening there. It's a reminder, I think many of us will have forgotten because we haven't been in lockdown for, well, over a year now, I guess, that it's actually still going on there. And it's a reminder that the way we got out of the situation was by having mass vaccinations pioneered here in the UK with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, with the UK being the first to vaccinate and therefore the first major economy to come out of lockdown. They didn't follow that approach in China. Instead, they've gone for a zero COVID, still back in the days where we'll remember it when we were in lockdown here, and people are clearly becoming impatient. Watching with concern because I think it's very important for the question of stability that, for example, vaccinations is the way forward to enable societies to unlock.
Yeah, but how concerned are we about that instability? I mean, I know that the boss is going to be speaking at the Guildhall tonight, and he's going to be talking about robust pragmatism, and that's what we need to do to stand up to the likes of China and Russia. I wonder how that robust pragmatism actually works, though, when we're seeing protesters and accredited journalists being arrested and beaten.
Well, there can be absolutely no excuse whatsoever for journalists who are simply covering the process going on for being beaten by the police. I know that's of considerable concern. But with regard to the wider issue, can you imagine, had we been locked down for another year, had we not acted so quickly and managed to mass vaccinate people in this country? When I see those pictures, it sort of takes you back to the worst days a couple of years ago of lockdown, and people are clearly getting pretty fed up about it. But in terms of our attitude towards China, it will be that robust pragmatism. It will always be saying that China's a reality, but we always need to remind ourselves that they do not run the same system of democracy that we're fortunate to live under.
Tell me about your energy saving campaign that you're going to launch today. Is this the same one that Liz Truss said that we weren't going to do?
Well, all I know is about the campaign I am launching, which is £1 billion to both help people improve.
That's not money, though, is it?
Well, that's billions on top of 6.6 billion that's been spent before. So this money is for people who've not been able to benefit from the previous schemes, and will help hundreds of thousands of homes. But in addition, I'm also announcing that we're going to be helping just to inform people better about how they can save energy. One of the tips, by the way, is something I've actually been able to use at home. It's called the boiler flow rate, and it's actually on your boiler where you can turn the temperature down, which is often set too high at 75 degrees, for example, to 60 degrees. This is not your thermostat. This is in the boiler itself, and it can potentially save you a lot of money on your energy costs each year. So it's actually simple tips like that, which we'll be announcing, and there's an £18 million campaign to back that as well. So lots of practical help, physically improving people's homes, and also tips to make sure that people are able to save themselves money by being more efficient in the homes.
Onshore wind, where are you on that at the moment?
Well, we already have a lot of onshore wind in this country. We have the world's most offshore wind of any country in the world. I think offshore has the potential to produce really...
onshore?
We already have quite a lot of onshore wind, and we're...
Should we have any more?
There will be more over time, but particularly where communities are in favour of it. And that is, I think, the key test for onshore wind, giving some benefit to communities locally. And that's always been a principle for us for quite some time now.
Looks as though Simon Clarke, former Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, who is now the Levelling Up Secretary, both forcing the government's hand on onshore wind. And Simon Clarke saying they're 5 MPs away from forcing the government to do what they want.
I don't recognise it in those terms at all. Simon Clarke has put in an amendment, which I haven't studied all the ramifications of yet, but actually essentially saying exactly what I said to you, which is that local people ought to have a very, very keen say in this, which is indeed government policy. There are always different ways to skin a cat, as it were, but we'll have a close look at what's being proposed. But
sounds like the government might be backing down on this one.
No, exactly what we've said all along. In fact, Rishi Sunak said the other week, where onshore happens, it needs to happen with local
he said he was
agreement.
against it. He said he was against any further onshore wind. He said that to me during the summer.
I think you're being far too black and white about this. I've always said... Yeah,
I absolutely pressed him on it, and he said he was against it. He said he'd misspoken the day before, and he said he was against onshore wind.
So I've always said, and indeed he has always said, where onshore wind happens, it needs to happen with local consent. What is being proposed is something which would guarantee that local consent. As I say, I haven't studied all the ramifications of that in terms of the planning changes, but to present it as some sort of massive gulf is completely untrue. We need, and I'll be talking about this more later in the week. I've just spoken to you about measures to reduce energy use. We also need to make sure that we produce more energy.
Okay.
We'll be doing that.
I wonder if I could ask you two very quick questions. I know you've got to flee in just a moment. You were Home Secretary. You were Home Secretary for 6 days, I think I'm right in saying. I'm hearing that David Davis is writing to the Prime Minister to say that anyone from safe countries like Albania should summarily have their applications rejected. Do you agree?
So what I'd say is, I have looked at this issue in some detail because of being briefly Home Secretary, where countries are not, where people's lives are not at risk, then clearly, and there isn't a case for asylum, then clearly that should be dealt with quickly and efficiently. And that's what I'd say on that issue. I'm so sorry, but I actually have one of your rival broadcasters calling, Kay, and I need to take their call. I think we're over time.
OK, we do have 12 minutes with you, don't we? We've done 12 minutes and 4 seconds. So let me just ask you in another 10 seconds, Matt Hancock, should he be able to be back with the Tory whip now?
Look, I don't think he should have gone to the jungle in the first place. And, it's often said politics is, or show business for ugly people. He should be back here with us ugly people in Parliament doing the job for his constituents. And that's what I think he should have done.
I've always found you rather dashing, actually, Mr. Shapps. So it's lovely to talk to you as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.